There we go. Yes.
Got it. It's your call, Yael. Tell us when to begin.
Yael, you were with us? Yeah, I think she asked me to take it. So, hi, I'm Gadi from RegenIL, the community and the Center for Region Ag in Israel. And we're very happy to host you, Ed, on this call. Hopefully some few more will join us as we go. And the Community and Center for Regenerative Agriculture in Israel, it's more or less what it sounds. We have a whole ecosystem community for regenerative agriculture, and a center to do the actions, the financials, some management of the whole community, and much more. And with that, I'll pass the mic, I think, to Aviram and Ilan, who will lead the call. They are both from the Ministry of Agriculture. We are very proud to have them in the ministry and in this call. So take it from here, guys.
Thank you very much. I would just ask to let you know that maybe you can turn on subtitles, automatic subtitles or something like that. Gadi? No? Okay.
How do I do that? From my app?
I'm just the messenger, so
yeah, it's more than I know as well. Okay,
well, if somebody knows, let me know.
Okay, so Ed, we'll just start everything in English. If anyone needs a translation or anything, of course you can ask or whatever. So this is recorded, and we have the chat on the side. Aviram and I will lead the talk. We will co-host this together, and we will ask questions to lead Ed to answer. And if there's an important question that you want to ask and is very important to everyone, I would advise that you do ask the question. But if it's something that can wait, because we have a Q&A at the end by around 5 p.m. Israel time, if you can, just wait for that. So I will introduce myself. Aviram, you will introduce yourself, and then I will lead it back to Ed. My name is Ilan. I work at the Ministry of Agriculture. I work at the Department of Soil Conservation. I lead the part of regenerative agriculture in my department in the Ministry of Agriculture. We have a lot of subsidized options for farmers in Israel, and we try to hold most of the knowledge that there is in Israel. Not necessarily our decision is what's good or what's not good for regenerative agriculture. We do not want to be the ones to decide it. It's a very, very, very broad and interesting aspect. So that's basically about me. Aviram, if you would like, and then I'll continue.
Thank you. I think we are a small community, so I believe I know everybody is in here, but I will say I'm an agronomist. I work in the Ministry of Agriculture, Extension Service, doing sustainable agriculture. And I'm here with the question I believe many of you ask is, what exactly is, how does regenerative agriculture looks or should look in Israel? Just diving into the real knowledge of how it's gonna work. So I'll let you start.
Okay, so Ed, I would think you should introduce yourself, and I would like you, after you introduce yourself, straightforward, if you could briefly outline your professional journey, what it is that you did, how did you come to specialize in regenerative agriculture, and let's start from here.
Okay, cool. Well, hi everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me along to talk. This is certainly the first event I've done with Israel as a country. I'm beginning to work my way around, but this is a great opportunity, so thank you. So yeah, I won't spend too long sort of introducing me, because we want to kind of get into the details of it. But I had a sort of introductory into agriculture unexpectedly. I left school early to join the forces, the armed forces. And then after that career, came back and was wondering what to do, got into farming. I went to agriculture university. When I left there, I took a job as an agronomist, and I worked for one of the top 4, we call them distribution agronomy companies in the UK. They're companies which sell inputs as well as providing agronomy advice. So I started the first couple of years of my career thinking that agronomy and crop production was all based around how you applied and how many inputs you applied to get a result. And quite quickly into my career, realized that there were a number of issues, both soil problems, environmental problems, crop production, agronomic issues that were cropping up, and we weren't able to fix them with the conventional ways of approaching agronomy. At that point, I switched to I started thinking about soils and soil health in more detail, and that quickly led into finding out about the principles of regenerative agriculture, following other people around the world and some early adopters in the UK. And so that was really the beginning of it. We're now 8 years later, and in the time that I was with that company, I started the kind of regenerative agriculture service, where I trained a team of agronomists to start thinking about regenerative principles. And the whole crux of my job really was to take a farmer on a journey from where they were at their starting point. Everybody's at a different starting point, understanding their soils, understanding their system, trying to work out what their objectives are and helping them get there. So practically implementing regenerative agriculture. So not just looking at it as science or theory, but actually how does this work on the ground? How do we implement it with success and try and reduce some of the risks associated with changing a farming system? So I finished my career with that company back in December of 2024, and I've joined a company called Wild Farmed as head of farming. So Wild Farmed is basically procures grain, predominantly wheat, from roughly 150 farmers across the UK. That wheat is all grown to our own third-party audited regenerative standards. And then we turn that grain into flour, and then we either sell it as flour or we make it into our own bread products, which we sell now, and a number of retailers across the country and growing rapidly. So it's a hugely exciting company. They're at the forefront of building a regenerative marketplace for farmers' produce in the UK, and it's incredibly exciting to be part of that team.
Okay, that's very interesting. How do you mentioned especially the wheat and the bread. How would you define your interest in potatoes? Because we're going to talk about potatoes as well. If you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, in my consultancy career to date, I've worked across all sorts of crops, pretty much any crop grown in the UK, be that something that's a crop directly consumed by humans, or indeed crops grown for livestock production. I've pretty much worked with them all, and potatoes is one. I suppose I've spent additional time in potatoes because my early stages of my agronomy career, I was specifically a potato agronomist for the first sort of year, 18 months. But then latterly, as I got into regenerative principles, it was something that kept coming up time and time again. I had potato farmers ringing me saying, how do I make this work? I really believe in this philosophy, but how do I make this work when I grow potatoes? Because it's a destructive crop. And so that really sort of sparked my interest in potato.
Well, let's go back one step, and I want to know, in your view, what are the core principles of regenerative agriculture, and how do you measure success in this kind of agriculture? And is it aligned with what farmland or wild farm are measuring? What are you measuring in the grains you're purchasing?
Yeah. So I think in its essence, the core principles are the ones that you will have hopefully all heard about. And if you haven't, that's kind of like the 5 key principles, or it's six now globally recognized. So it's minimizing disturbance, maximizing diversity, keeping soil covered, maintaining living roots, integrating livestock, and then the one that gets added more recently is understanding your context. So basically doing all of those other principles in the context of your farm, your country, the crop that you're growing, or the markets that you're growing for. So they're the nuts and bolts of regenerative agriculture, and they're the principles that we try and follow as much as we can, in as much depth as we can, regardless of where we are, what soil we have, or what crop we're growing. It's trying to follow those principles. But I think the really important bit then is because really anybody can apply those principles to some degree or another, but what is it that actually makes them regenerative? And that for me is what that system then delivers. So what are the outcomes? And those are the bits that we really need to focus on measuring, and those are the bits that us at Wild Farmed are spending a lot of time and a lot of money measuring outcomes to make sure that when we say the bread that's on the shelves labeled Wild Farmed is regenerative, here's why. So that's water quality, soil health, carbon emissions, nutrient density, biodiversity within the fields that those Wild Farmed crops are drilled. All of those things now we can measure. Now, I'm not saying we have the perfect way of measuring them yet. Some of this technology is new and developing all the time, but we have ways of measuring all of those things. And so that's why we're spending the time and the money that we do on measuring them, because it's so important. The only thing that makes you regenerative is actually delivering those outcomes.
Okay.
If I take, sorry, Ilan, if I take just, let's focus on the soil health for a minute. Let's talk about how you measure soil health in your company, in your line.
Yeah, so soils are incredibly complex, and is this kind of a true natural system. Even if they're degraded, or they're really thriving and healthy, they're still a natural system. And so inherently natural systems are quite difficult to measure, to quantify, because there are so many variables. So for me, it's not a case of relying on one single metric. Some people tend to get hung up on one or two key things, like maybe organic matter or earthworms or whatever it may be. They look at one single dimension, but actually it's multiple parameters which make up a truly healthy soil. And when you're trying to get an accurate picture of the health of a soil, I think it's really important to measure as many of the parameters as you can, whilst still being sort of affordable and practical to do so. Because when you bring them all together, it kind of removes lots of the variables, because if you have 6 or 7 out of 10 metrics are all positive, then that's a pretty strong indication that you've got a healthy soil. Whereas if you're just relying on one thing, it's quite weak.
What would you say that can you elaborate?
I was just going to say, shall I talk about what some of those measures are? Yeah.
Well, of course, you can elaborate on that, and we'll continue with the next question after that. Sorry.
Yeah. So really diving into that in a bit more detail, I think it's looking at the 3 key pillars of soil health, which is biology, chemistry, and physics. So traditionally, we're pretty good at measuring the chemistry bit. So we're looking at pH, we're looking at nutrient levels, but in real detail. Also looking at pH in more detail. We're looking at trace elements. We're looking at various ways of measuring organic matter and carbon. We're looking at soil respiration. Then physical properties, physically assessing the structure of soil, digging holes and having a look at soil, measuring earthworms. Water infiltration as well is important, and then the kind of the third pillar, which is always the bit that hasn't been measured much at all, and is still quite difficult to measure, is the biological bit. So things like that would be earthworm counts, soil respiration is an indicator of biological health, and there are also now other tests available. So for instance, the PLFA test is beginning to get used more widely globally, which can measure the presence of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes without them necessarily needing to be in that soil sample. So it means they're much easier to detect. The difficult thing is when you have a soil test that comes back and says you have 10 protozoa, for example. What's good? We know so little about, you know, soils, and particularly truly healthy, well-functioning soils, that we can measure these things, but we don't necessarily know what's good and what's bad. Obviously 0 is bad, but what level do you have to get to before that becomes good? So I think, but that will just come in time. The more we measure soils, the more we have a range of different soil types, then we'll begin to be able to calibrate those tests to understand where we sit.
Sorry, I was muted. You spoke about soil health, and I would like to, what do you do, or how is soil moisture tracked and preserved throughout the growing season? I mean, if obviously you want life to thrive, you have to measure the moisture, and it's something that we spoke about, that in Israel, of course, we have a dry season. Right about now, at the mid of May, it's the last of the rains. We won't see a drop of rain probably until November, hopefully November. And the UK is also facing a problematic drought syndrome. It goes on and on, that every year you get more and more droughts, and you get more and more dry season. How do you address that, and how do you check your soil moisture? And if people can please mute themselves, thank you.
Yeah, so I think you've pretty much straight away touched on something which I perceive to be kind of like certainly within a UK context, and I'm sure given the Israeli climate as well, water management is just becoming the key focus of farming, really, in outdoor crops. So it's about having a functioning soil that can handle high levels of rainfall, i.e. they can infiltrate rain and water, they can drain away excess water, but also have enough organic matter that they can store as much water as possible for times when it becomes dry and we go into prolonged drought periods, so that crops can still access water even though we haven't had rain for longer periods. And we're seeing extremes of weather now in the UK, and I think globally, you know, we have really wet periods and then we have really dry periods, and we flip between one and the other. And that just makes the focus on soils and their ability to handle and store water just the sole focus really now of farming. And, you know, soil water holding capacity really comes down to two things. It's A, depth of soil. B, it's clay content, so your actual physical makeup of the soil, which clearly you can't change. You can't change the depth, and you can build soil over time, but you can't really change the depth. You can't change the clay content. You have what you have, but you can change the organic matter. And so that's why people talk so much about organic matter, because from a water holding point of view and soil structure and everything else, organic matter is so important. You may have heard probably various different numbers, but the one I always quote is that for every 1% additional organic matter in your topsoil, you can hold another 20,000 gallons of water per acre. So, you know, it just really focuses your mind on how important having organic matter in the soil is from a moisture preservation point of view.
So if we'll speak about, let's start with wheat, maybe we'll go to potatoes, but can you speak about the key practices you know to be most beneficial of doing exactly that? I mean, regarding soil health, soil moisture, and everything that you want to measure as a success for your company, but what are the key practices you advise?
Well, from a water holding point of view, if we carry on that previous question, they kind of all interlink. So the principles we're trying to follow have multiple benefits, but particularly they have benefits for water holding capacity. So it's trying to so things which lose moisture is basically cultivation and having bare soil. So trying to avoid cultivation where you can, and always trying to avoid having bare soil are two of the biggest biggest factors when it comes to preserving soil moisture. So trying to use reduced tillage or even no tillage if it's practically possible to do so. I make that point because it's not always the right option for somebody to go straight to no-till. It can be just as damaging to do no-till badly as it can to do too much cultivation. So it's important to get that balance right, but clearly using as little cultivation as possible will preserve soil moisture and having the soil covered, because if sunlight and radiation hits bare soil, the moisture loss is going to be much, much quicker than if it has physical protection. And the other thing that having that reducing tillage and having soil cover, and then also you bring in the concept of living roots and plant diversity, what those things all do is contribute towards the building of organic matter. And that's the bit that maintains soil structure, improves water infiltration, and improves water holding capacity as well.
So it makes total sense in orchards, and also let's say also in wheat. But when you go to potatoes and you ask for no tillage, that doesn't work. I mean, not in Israel. I bet also in England that it's not the way you grow potatoes. So what do you do when you cannot have these practices?
Yeah, so in the particular part of the UK that I live, and there are other parts of the UK as well, we have some really very light sandy soils. Okay, so their organic matter levels are very low, and they very quickly become moisture stressed. But one of the things we've observed with potato crops here, by focusing on the principles of RegenAg, is how little differences make a big difference when it comes to water use and water holding capacity. So a farm that I very first started working with in real detail on potatoes, we made a simple change on that farm, which was initially to start incorporating more residues, so straw from previous cereal crops, and also starting to use cover crops definitely before the potato crops, but also before any other spring crops in his rotation. And we did some trials in a large field, replicated trials where there were 4 plots which had residues returned and cover crops utilized, and then 4 plots which didn't have those practices. And the next time that field came round into potatoes, which was 3 years later, we saw huge differences in terms of both growth of the crop, stabilization of the potato ridge. So the sand wasn't washing off the ridges when they irrigated, but also the potatoes in the plots that had cover crops and residues actually didn't need, according to our moisture probes, they didn't actually need irrigating till about 3, 4, and sometimes 5 days later than the plots that hadn't received any residues or cover crops. And you could see in the ridge that there were physical particles of organic matter in the potato ridge. So they were holding that ridge together, which in itself is preserving moisture. But also when we did irrigate or when it rained, rather than just washing off, that moisture, that rain was able to infiltrate the ridges and was also held within the ridges to be available to the potato crop. So very, very quickly, doing 2 very simple practices, we made quite a big difference to moisture levels and water retention, and obviously water availability to that potato crop. And actually the yield difference at the end of that season was just over 2 tons per hectare in favor of the crop that had cover crops and organic matter. So that was in the very early days of me beginning to implement these practices, and it was a real kind of light bulb moment for me that we were on the right track.
So in a system we have crop rotation, and the potatoes or carrots or whatever are part of the crop rotation. And we spoke about cover crops and residues, but we also have manure and compost added. What would you say the best time in the crop rotation to add the manure or the compost? Because we know the potato in Israel can afford the compost adding, but you don't necessarily have to do it right before the potatoes, or how do you approach this?
To be honest, I think adding that compost or manure at any point in the rotation is good. I try and always apply those things when I'm going to get the most benefit, either nutritionally or because it's practically the best time to do it. So if I'm growing a crop which is hungry, like maybe potatoes or anything else for that matter, and it's going to use a lot of the nutrients that are in that organic amendment, then I would try and put that on as close to that crop as possible. But I think one of the things we have to be careful of here particularly is traveling across fields to apply manures and compost can sometimes, cause compaction. So we have to make sure that we do that at a time of the year where it's going to have the least impact. So multiple things I would think about as to when to apply that. I think you might be going to ask me this, but I'll say it anyway. So I think the thing with potatoes, more so than normal arable crops like wheat, is really I call it marginal gains. Okay, so every little thing you can possibly do to tweak the system is really important in potatoes, because we're causing that big impact from cultivations and harvesting. We really have to focus on the detail. One of those important details is looking at the rest of the rotation. So what you do in the other crops between potatoes has a huge impact on how sustainably, regeneratively we can do that potato crop, and has a big impact on the soil health, soil function going into potatoes. And I always say it's about building resilience so that when what you're trying to do is with your other crops in the rotation, you sort of go 3 or 4 steps forward. And then when you put the potatoes in there, you only go 1 or 2 steps back. Whereas if you're not applying those principles to the rest of the rotation, you're sort of standing still. And then when you put potatoes in, you're going 2 steps back. So actually you're just going backwards all of the time. So it's trying to build resilience. And I said it to you guys before when we spoke, and I always try and say this really clearly so that people don't misunderstand me, but I don't think that potatoes themselves can be regenerative, but I think that a farm which grows potatoes in rotation can be regenerative while still growing them. So if I need to say that clearer, let me know, because sometimes people hear that and they think I'm just saying that potatoes can't be regenerative. I think within the context of a farm which is putting all the right practices in place, then they can be. That farm can be.
So everybody understood that? I mean, you're absolutely right. It's very important to understand that one crop maybe cannot be regenerative agriculture certified, but if you're a farm that manage the whole crop rotation regeneratively, you can get good outcomes.
Yeah, and
hopefully you measure them.
Yeah, and I think that's why, I mean, if we can call a wheat crop regenerative, okay? If it follows the principles and it delivers the outcomes, it can generally do that within the year. Now, a crop of potatoes might not be able to deliver on all of those outcomes, but what we probably need to do with potato farms is to say this farm is delivering regenerative outcomes. It's protecting water, it's improving air quality, soil quality, etc., etc. So the farm is regenerative, and then maybe by default those potato crops, provided they're employing the best practices possible, could be called regenerative. But we need to be really focused on what it is that we're claiming about them.
So that's very interesting, and I would advise everyone to take those key sentences that were just said, because the meaning of rotation is rotation. It's a circle. It doesn't start and end at a singular point. It's something to take in consideration all the time. Can you, because you spoke about the years before and the years after the potatoes or the wheat, can you walk us through your soil preparation and your harvest flow? Where do you start? When do you plow or when do you don't? Because we usually, not necessarily all of us in Israel, but usually if we try to apply regenerative agriculture, we would add the manure or a compost or whatever when we do plow the field. But like you just said, it doesn't mean that's the right thing to always do, because maybe you want the nutrients in a better for the next crop. So what is your soil preparation from soil preparation to harvest? What is your workflow?
Across the whole rotation or just for potatoes?
Let's say potatoes, but I'm talking about especially the specific part where you take a tractor and you open the soil. Okay, how does that work?
Okay, well, I'll talk about kind of a typical, or what is becoming a typical rotation in the UK now. So we're trying to limit growing potatoes or carrots or intensive veg crops like that to 1 in 6 years. So we have a 6-year rotation, and those crops are grown only once in that rotation. So I would do, there would be 5 years of other combinable crops generally. So there might be 2 or 3 wheat crops. There may be some oilseed rape or canola. There could be peas or beans. So they're all kind of typical combinable arable crops for those 5 years. And generally, a farm which has focused on its soils, it's understood its soils, and is trying to employ all these principles, would be establishing all of those crops either direct drilled or a very shallow cultivation pass before direct drilling. So that's the general premise. So we're not moving soil to any great degree for the rest of the rotation. We're shallow cultivating or direct drilling. And then it sort of comes around to the potato crop. And in the UK, potatoes are grown in the spring. So the previous autumn or the previous summer, we would have drilled a cover crop following wheat. That cover crop will grow over the winter, and then we'll plant our potatoes in the spring. And it really depends on soil types, whether you have a high stone content in your fields, as to how much preparation you need to do for potatoes. The very best soils, sometimes in the UK, on very good silt soils, they just go straight in with the planter. They'll do some form of light cultivation straight in with the planter. Sometimes they can do maybe some subsoiling and then in with the planter. Sometimes they need to plow. Sometimes they need to plow and then de-stone and then so the range of cultivations needed can vary quite a bit. But one of the things I've tried to get potato growers to focus on is actually assessing fields on an individual basis or areas of the farm. So rather than saying, okay, I've got 500 acres of potatoes to plant, I'm going to do the same thing on every single field because it's easier to manage it that way. I actually try and get people to focus on, does every single field need ploughing, or does every single field need de-stoning? Because the less you can do, the bigger the impact that will make. I'm also then trying to get people to, what you'll generally find is if you have well-functioning soils that have had a cover crop over winter, they will be in a much better position in the spring to start planting a little bit earlier because they're easier to work and they'll be in a better position to start planting earlier. The other end of the season, at harvest time, that then means they'll be harvested earlier, which in the UK climate means that they won't be trying to harvest potatoes when it's wet, which has a huge impact on soil damage. And trying to encourage people to use varieties which mature a little bit earlier as well. So shorten the growing season, which means that we can then plant our following crop, which is usually winter wheat here, much earlier. Root system gets through the soil profile and those soils begin to repair much quicker. And even sometimes if we have particularly early harvested potatoes, we can fit a cover crop between potato harvest and then drilling the wheat. So that's where I try and get people.
You spoke about the cover crops during the winter before the potato season. What do you do to end them? And do you harvest them?
No, so we would either graze them with sheep, or we would spray them off with glyphosate, or we would incorporate them with cultivation of some sort.
So you spoke about taking the big farm and dividing it into each and every specific field. What are the barriers that you face when you approach farmers in the UK? What barriers, other than that, do you have barriers of implementing regenerative agriculture in wheat or in potatoes?
I always, if I'm trying to convince somebody of the kind of principles of Regen Ag and they're just not interested at all, then I try to just get them to try one thing. And that one thing generally then kickstarts the interest into trying other things, and then it snowballs from there. And I also try with those people to try and put it in an economic context. So forget soil health, forget the environment, forget everything else. Here's one thing that you can try that will make this difference in terms of monetary value. So if you do this, you can either get more yield or get that yield for less cost, or it'll make a tangible difference in terms of the economics of growing that crop. And usually that sparks interest, perhaps more than some of the other factors. And then so that the barriers are generally just that people don't see a financial benefit of it necessarily. They might get the environmental stuff, they might understand why people would want to follow that path, but for them, they're just business focused. They want to make money the best way they can, and they don't necessarily see this as a way of doing that. So it's trying to get them to try one thing, make an impact. I think, but in terms of other barriers, it actually is the complete opposite end of the spectrum, whereby so often people will come to me and they're sort of almost too enthusiastic in that they're trying to implement practices sooner than their soils are ready for. So they'll maybe start direct drilling before their soils are ready, or they'll maybe cut nitrogen fertilizer rates much quicker than they should be, or they'll stop using pesticides or greatly reduce it. And all of this is done before they've really implemented the right practices, and they've built up their soil health, and they've designed their system appropriately, so that when they do those things, it doesn't reduce yield, because they've tried to do all these things too quickly. They've had a yield loss, they're making less money, and they're coming to me saying this doesn't work, but it's that they've tried to do too much too soon.
When I reach farmers, that is one of the things that I say. It's a process. You cannot see a difference or a significant difference in 1 year without assuming or understanding that you will see differences in the next year. It's a process. I usually count it by at least 4 to 7 years. But what are you spoke about that you prefer reaching a farmer and speaking him to do it from the heart. Other than the money, other than that, we still have to talk about the money. What are the public policies or government incentives that exist in the UK? If anyone here in the audience wants me to elaborate about Israel, we can do it later. But what do you have in the UK that can promote regenerative farming?
Well, if you'd asked me this question even 6 months ago, I would have had a really positive answer. I think I do still have a positive answer, but the UK government are making things a bit difficult for us at the moment. So for those who don't know, we're moving away from the basic payment scheme in the UK, which was a set figure per hectare just for owning land, towards a system which rewards farmers for delivering what we call public goods. So improving soils, looking after the environment, increasing biodiversity. So there were a wide range of payments available for practices for all kinds of farmers, be that livestock, cereals, potatoes, fruit, you name it. There were payments available to incentivize best practice. And actually, I was really positive about those, because for me, it wasn't a money-making opportunity from claiming those payments, but it took some risk away. So if I want to move towards reduced tillage or direct drilling, there's a risk there. Even if I've done the best possible thing I can to understand my soils, there's always a risk. But the government in the UK were paying roughly £70 per hectare as a direct drilling payment. So for me, that was like, okay, there's just about enough there for me to go, that's taking some of the risk away, and so I'll give that a try. They were paying an area payment for cover crops, which would cover the cost of the seed and the establishment of cover crops and all other kinds of things. And it was really very positive. But unfortunately, the administration of those payments was so disastrous that they ran out of money really quickly, because they gave too much money basically to the number of people who were early adopters, and then they run out, and then there's not enough to give to other people. So they've stopped that scheme for the time being. They're relaunching it next year, but they're probably going to have a limit on how much each farm can claim. So I think in its essence, it was a really, really good thing, and it incentivized all the right kind of practices. But increasingly now, and particularly us as a company, when we're looking at how much we set the wheat price or the barley price for wild farm growers, we are removing those payments because we have to make the finances add up without those payments, because we can't rely on them. We basically can't rely on the government to get it right, unfortunately. And so we have to make sure it works financially first. And then if the government payments come along, or indeed private sector finance, then that's all kind of, it's an additional bonus.
So if we have a saying in Israel that we are in some areas, we're 5 to 10 years in a lag after Europe or the US. And we want to take a look at what's going on in England and ask you about the market. How is the market? Because you said now the policies are not so sure they're going to stay, or they're not going to work, and they're not stable enough. So how is the private market for the prices of grains or potatoes? Like, what are you seeing now that maybe we're going to encounter in the future?
I mean, this kind of stuff is way above my pay grade, okay? But I'm gonna get big picture here and kind of give you my opinion on this. I think if I was looking at what had happened to date in other countries and think, like, where would I start to try and really get this right? I would start with the human health piece, and because if a government in a country somewhere in the world can get its people and its politicians to understand that the route to true human health and reduced disease issues and the reduced costs of health are directly associated to the food and the diet that we eat, and then the marketplace which sells that food recognizes this and places a value on it, and the people that buy food place a value on it, that will incentivize the farmers to do the right practices. And there you have it. You have a supply chain which grows food in the right way because it produces healthy food and it produces a healthy environment, and that food in the marketplace is valued because they see it as a direct link to human health. That honestly is the best way to get this to work. That's also the most difficult way. And it's incredibly hard to get that going. I honestly hope that one day that we can, but that's very difficult. Aside from that, you either go the way the UK government have gone and give subsidy payments incentivizing best practice, or there's private sector kind of interest around nature payments now, be that carbon or biodiversity, nature credits. So that's another avenue as well. But really, for me, the most effective is to make that link between soils, food, and human health.
So right now, if we dive back to what's going on, wild farm, are you paying more than the average price? So I mean, that is also interesting for us to know that there is a market for regenerative products or commodities. So what is the difference between the different commodities? I mean, let's say regular, organic, regenerative, organic, if there is a such thing in the UK.
Yeah, so yes, Wild Farmed are paying a significant premium for wheat versus conventional, and that is because there is a market in the UK for our flour produced to those standards, but it's just not the mass market yet. It's a rapidly increasing market, and actually, you know, some of the supermarket deals that we've done just very recently are a sure sign that big food companies and retailers are actually beginning to want to place a value on these products. Not convinced yet they've really understood how to sell that to their customers, but they're certainly beginning to place a value on it. And so organic in the UK has been around for a long time. It's a small proportion of the food sector. It hasn't really grown. And I don't necessarily see it growing that much. I think regenerative has a genuine opportunity to replace if you have organic and then you have the rest. Regenerative could be the rest if we can get retailers and consumers to understand the value of their food. And so the reason we're able to find a better price in the marketplace for our wheat is that our customers understand that we've done a really good job on getting our customers to understand where the grain is produced, how it's produced, and what the benefits are associated with it, so they can directly see that. And it's also traceable right back to the farmer. Understand, you know, inevitably we're going to have to. It's a constant balance, okay, between wanting to pay our farmers as much as we can to incentivize them to change, but also we have to recognize that the bigger food companies you begin to deal with, the more your margins are going to get pressurized. So we have to walk that balance constantly. And I don't have all. Yeah.
No, just wondering if you're working mostly internal, I mean, in the UK, or do you have collaboration with, I mean, export, import, Europe? Is it a growing market? So it's all European market for regenerative commodities?
Well, Wild Farmed itself is UK only at the moment, although we are beginning to look outside of the UK, both in terms of our brand, but also in terms of procuring grain and growing crops. But there are other good examples of regenerative food businesses in other parts of the world which are doing a very similar job, and likewise within livestock in the UK there are some good examples of companies doing this with beef and lamb and chicken and pork, managing to find a market for producing food in a different way. So there are good examples in other countries now. And the more that happens, the quicker we'll move. Ultimately, it's the market which will always dictate the way in which farmers feel they have to produce their crops.
Interesting. Ilan, you want to?
Yes.
I also suggest that we will leave enough time for the questions, because I know the audience, and some of them for sure will have many questions.
So I would like to ask our last question, and that is, how do you envision the evolution of regenerative agriculture, wheat and potatoes, or all together in the UK over the coming decade or so? Because we've seen that you've described things that are in some ways very similar to what we have in Israel. Obviously, we have many differences. How do you see the evolution of this sector in the upcoming decade or so in the UK?
I think that in terms of understanding how to do regenerative wheat, definitely a bit more work to do on potatoes. I think we know how to do it. We know how to grow the crop in the field in a way which we can all recognize as regenerative. I think what we now need to do is keep refining that so that it becomes accessible and appealing to everybody. Okay, so I want to get to a point where we have all of the wheat in the UK produced to these standards, and all of the potatoes, everybody beginning to move in the same direction, because that's when we can really make a difference. And I think the second piece is just really around the markets evolving. The markets evolving to begin to recognize this and support it. I think it's really interesting to see where technology is going, both in terms of measuring some of the outcomes for us and, you know, agronomic tools, crop production tools, but also, yeah, just it's a fascinating space. I've sort of been in this industry for 10 years, which is kind of a long time, but not a long time compared to others. But in my time, I've seen technology increase in terms of the amount of it, the complexity of it, but it's very rare to see something that starts off as an idea and becomes then just normal in agriculture. Really, the main thing that's happened is kind of auto steer tractors, RTK. It's a no-brainer. Now everybody's using it, whereas once upon a time not many people used it. So it's really hard for technology to come in and become a normal thing. But I think some of the things I'm looking at nowadays, be it technology on sprayers, mechanical weeders, laser weeders, harvesting technologies, seed separation, on-farm seed separation, so farmers can grow multiple crops in the same field and separate them post-harvest. I think some of the things we're beginning to see now, I can see them becoming, you know, much more common practice.
So, Ivan, before you take us to the Q&A, or I just wanted, I know that you're going to speak at the Groundswell this year.
Yeah,
so
I'm on
maybe you're going to
panel with
take
agronomists.
A panel, okay. Yeah. So what day? I mean, let's maybe not everybody knows about Groundswell. What can you say about this conference there for agronomists and farmers?
Yeah, well, I mean, this will be Groundswell's 8th year. I've been to every single one, starting out from when it was 150 people in a very dark shed in a corner of the farm to now what is just a huge show. And to me, it hasn't lost its magic. So Groundswell has been that place for farmers who are already practicing or beginning to practice regenerative principles and thinking differently about how they do things, to go and see and hear from and speak to like-minded people and get inspiration. You know, even now, 8 years in, and as far as I've come down this regenerative road, I still learn new things every year. I still come away from that event with a huge amount of inspiration. I always call it sort of recharging my farming batteries for the year, because, you know, I come away with 364 days worth of energy to carry on doing what we're doing. And so, yeah, I mean, you'll just hopefully love it.
So
I want to thank you very much for this interview.
See and hear everything, anything from potatoes, fruit, vines, wheat, livestock. You know, it's all there now, and you can hear from producers, retailers, just the number of people now, and you see politicians becoming really interested in it, members of the royal family. Everybody wants to have a piece of Groundswell. There's something for everybody. So anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. I'll shut up about Groundswell now.
No, that was the idea. We're gonna go to the Q&A section now. Whatever it is you want to ask Ed, I'll try to maneuver. You can raise your hand or just interrupt, but I will give the honor, and I'll conclude at the end. I'll give an ending statement, I guess. I will give the honor to Gadi. You had a question. Go ahead. You can start.
Okay.
Just
thank you.
One thing before you start. I wanted to say that if someone wants to ask a question and doesn't feel comfortable in English, so write it in Hebrew and we'll butcher it and we'll send the question to Ed. I mean, we'll ask him in English. You can write it in the chat in Hebrew.
Okay. I really respect all the audience we have here. So actually, I'll ask the question, but please don't answer now, and maybe we'll get to it later. My question is about the trajectory, how regenerative agriculture, as you know it from your perspective, has evolved, when and what were the milestones or the trajectory that it evolved. I think in the UK and most countries I know where it is kind of advanced, the farmers-led movement. So like, who started it in the UK? How did it catch up to become something big? Well, who were your teachers and other people's teachers? And what's the situation now? What are the gaps? What's holding it from developing more, and where could it go? It could be a very long answer, so I really want to respect others. I'll just raise a question and let's hear others, okay? Thank you.
I can do that one fairly quickly if you want me to.
I'll let the facilitators decide.
Yeah, I say go ahead, and if anyone has a question or wants to ask, just go ahead with it. But you can start by answering, Ed.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think, as I said, a bit like when I was talking about the very first year of Groundswell, with it being a very small number of people, I think when it started, as with any new idea, it was small scale, which inevitably meant it was farmer led. It was a handful of kind of pioneering farmers and agronomists who were beginning to try things and sharing knowledge between them. And yeah, I mean, it's really now, it's so widespread that there aren't many parts of farming or food production or government departments that it kind of doesn't reach now. And so that's why we see such a diverse group of people at Groundswell, because it affects so many people and it's on everybody's agenda now, whereas it was originally kind of, it was a niche group of people and it wasn't a very big sector. And it's hard now to say what proportion of UK farmers are practicing regen ag, because probably more of them say they are than actually are. But that in itself is a sign of success, because if you are a farmer who's not necessarily practicing regen ag truly, but you're enthusiastic about it enough to the point where you want to say you're doing it, then that's positive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Does anyone else have a question?
I have one.
Go ahead, Aviram.
But only if nobody else is jumping here. You spoke about how what's paying for all of it is nowadays, and it looks like it's going to be the market. I mean, the consumer or the big companies, big food, and they're gonna pay, they're gonna value this kind of agriculture. And on the other hand, you spoke about it's a farmers-led movement. It's not really a system. It's a movement, and it's farmers-led. So what is the balance, or how it works in your world, and because now in Israel we're in kind of this situation that it is farmers-led, but there's a big ecosystem behind that, and it could shift for the big food companies. It could be, let's say, taken away from the farmers. How do you observe what's going on in the UK right now?
Yeah, I think just to say, so I hope that the big retailers and the food companies will truly value it, and they are beginning to. But as I said before, we need to go a step further than that, and it's the end consumer that's the one that we really need to focus on as valuing it. And I think that the food companies at the moment are valuing it because they see it as a potential kind of sales pitch. So it's like, oh, this is a new thing that we can grab onto and use to sell products and get a higher value out of it, but they don't necessarily have the consumer at the other end who's willing to pay that yet. So to make this whole thing work, it's really the consumer that we need to educate and understand and put the power in them to go out and pay for this stuff. In terms of the evolvement of it being farmer-led, I think we've seen here that, so originally it was farmers, and then I guess agronomy companies and consultants who were there to kind of support farmers in the transition. And we then, I think the kind of science and research institutes have almost been the last to jump on with it, really. The food companies came along. The markets almost reacted a bit quicker than necessarily the research community did here. There were obviously some really keen and proactive scientists and researchers who have been involved in regen ag since the start, but now we're really beginning to see the research institutes that everybody knows and respects in the UK shift their focus from fungicides to soil health and and these kinds of practices. So I think that is really, really important, because whilst we want it to be farmer-led, if you can have respected research institutes analysing what the farmers are doing and giving it in really clear results that, yes, this does work, then that's very powerful in terms of getting other people to change as well.
I will give you, though, the honor, but I just wanted to know who's in charge of the marketing and education of the end customer in the British ecosystem of RegenIL?
Great question. I mean, really, it's got to start with schools, right? I say this stuff's above my pay grade, but surely if we're educating kids about where their food comes from and how it's produced and how to value it right from a young age, then, you know, they're inevitably going to become adult consumers who are consciously making better decisions. As for how we capture, you know, those who aren't kids, us, called and convince the older generation or any generation that isn't still in education, I think generally those people, if you ask them, do you care about your health? The answer is yes. So it's finding a way somehow, be that through, I don't know, we have to go through the channels that they consume all of their information through. And I think most of the channels that people consume their information through at the moment are full of advertisements for junk food. So how about we use social media, yeah, exactly, people's phones and TV and stuff to start feeding genuinely true and interesting and positive information about food and their choices, and then we can have that impact. But we're up against some pretty powerful opposition on that one.
Thank you, Ido.
And then Gadi.
Thanks so much. Very interesting stuff. I was wondering, from your perspective, after working the time you had, about what do you think about the following expansion of RegenAg? Do you think it will be more because of improved farmer profitability, because improved soil fertility, or because of standards and consumer, what we just discussed, consumer demand? What do you think will be the more dominant factor?
I think the farmer outcomes will always be the dominant factor, because any food company or government or anybody else can tell a farmer that this is amazing, but unless he sees it for himself and it makes a difference, positive difference to his business, then he's not going to do it. So I think it's educating the farmer, him or her implementing those principles and seeing it make a difference, improving profitability, improving his soils, his farm environment, and then that will always be more powerful than somebody trying to persuade him to do so.
Thanks. Hook up with you on Groundswell this year. We're going to be there. I hope to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Gadi?
Okay. I think you answered some of our question. My question was about the relations of farmers like you, let's say, or advisors with the research institutes. You answered it partly. I'd like to get more into that. And with government officials, how are the relations? And I'll say as a by statement that this year we're going to go to Groundswell with a group of let's say high officials from the Israeli government, and I mean government, not political level, the professionals like Aviram and others, and with some of the top researchers in Israel who are interested or already calling themselves into RegenIL. So I'm really very, very proud of it. I don't think it happens with other countries so much. So we have a whole ecosystem moving, but we're searching the way. So this is very helpful, all the conversation with you. Yeah, if you can elaborate a bit, if you know what kind of connections you have with, I don't know, Rothamsted Research that I know they're into it, or Royal Agriculture University, or Leeds, or you have, I don't know, quite a few universities and research institutes and government officials. How much do you have a dialogue there?
Yeah, well, I mean, with Wild Farm, we work with a number of those. So particularly Rothamsted, Harper Adams University, the Royal Agricultural University, Bristol University have done a lot of work for our insect studies. So yeah, we've got good relationships with those people now, and I think it's funny. It's a little bit like the farmer movement into regenerative agriculture. It was pioneered by one or two really keen people. So these universities and research institutes have had one or two really keen people who have pushed this forward. For example, Professor Andy Neal from Rothamsted is a prime example of somebody who's been in an organization that perhaps wasn't pushing in this direction, but he's gone against the grain, and now it's becoming of interest. And so it's followed a very similar pattern, really. But I think historically they have been, apart from a lot of the really good work has never been shared with the farmers. It maybe reaches agronomists and it reaches universities, but it never really gets down to farm level, and a really great piece of research never gets turned into a farm scale field trial, actually assessing some of those practices in a field. And so it all gets a bit lost. And it's amazing when you do a bit of Google searching over certain topics, you'll find papers on some of this stuff from actually quite a number of years ago. And it's like, well, where was this? And we haven't heard about it. And so there's a real opportunity there around communication, I think, from these organizations to make sure that anything they're doing is really communicated well to the people on the ground doing it. And better than that, involving them from the beginning. So rather than, maybe doing like small glasshouse studies to initially look at a problem, but then quickly try and get that out into the field and understand how it works at field scale. And one of the things that gets said a lot is that traditionally science has been quite one-dimensional in farming. So we discover a compound, we apply it to a fungus, and it either works or it doesn't. Well, we're beginning now to try and look at farming in a whole complex systems thinking. Okay, so we need to not just trial things in one dimension. We need to understand the whole system, the soil, the environment, the plant ecology, and look at things as a system rather than trying to just focus on single elements, because when they then go out into the field, they're part of a system, so they have to work in that context.
If I may, to piggyback on that, so this is the loneliness also of the researcher, which I also identified very much. There are films, there's a lot of movement encouraging the leading farmers. I think we should have the same for researchers, at least. Yeah. And for the advisors like you and others. But
there's a potential that the funding is an issue as well, though, because I went to Harper Adams University. The library was built by a machinery manufacturer. The placement years were paid for by chemical manufacturers. We need to think about where the funding for research is coming from, because a professor may well have a great idea about trialing something for regenerative agriculture, but who's going to pay for it?
Totally. And so do you have today interactions, dialogue, a place, formally or not formally, to interact with institutional players like research and government? I think you have with probably you have in general with the food companies, because they are priding themselves to be region ag directed or motivated, right? So they are more into, they're proud of it, but how does it go with the other institutes?
Yeah, we're fortunate, I guess, but also it's down to the hard work of the founders of Wild Farm. But Andy Cato and Ed Lees, the founders of the company, because they've got us to where we've got to as the pioneers of this within the UK, they have a platform with all of these different people, be that government ministers, politicians, research institutes, food companies, big retailers. We have their ear. So we're having these conversations all of the time, and that even they will tell you now they're listening versus 4 years ago, 5 years ago when the company started, they were less interested. Our customer base was high-end bakeries in central London, and because they valued what we were doing, whereas now we're having conversations at the very highest level. So it's beginning to change. And I think as a result of that, we'll begin to see what we need to see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ziv, you had a question? Ziv Meital.
Yes, hello. First of all,
Hi.
thank you for the conversation. It's really interesting. And I want to ask about maybe
introduce
can you
yourself.
give us? Huh?
Would you introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Ziv. I work at the Agriculture Ministry. I work at the extension, mainly in potatoes. Potatoes, carrots, sweet potatoes, and other vegetables, but mainly potatoes. And I really interested to ask you about examples. Maybe you can give us specific examples for improvement that the cover crops that you seed before potato. Maybe what it improve for you? It's I mean the quality, or maybe the yield of the potato, or the water usement. It's what I want to ask you.
Yeah, thank you. So specifically with cover crops before potatoes, yes. So we've seen, I talked about the example earlier of the better water use or better water retention from the use of cover crops. Also, there has been a quality improvement because I mentioned about having higher particulate organic matter levels within the ridge. So I mentioned that in relation to water and better ridge structure. But one of the things about better ridge structure is that you had less soil wash and therefore less greens, as we call them. So when the sunlight hits the green, they're rejected. So we have much less greens. So actually our wastage from the potato crop was reduced because we had less rejections for greens. And one of the things I've looked quite a lot at with cover crops in potatoes and in other crops is nutrient cycling from cover crops. And so understanding the soils as to their nutrient availability and what might we expect the crop to be able to take up, and then measuring the crop via SAP analysis. I've seen in a number of cases, not always, but a number of cases, improved nutrient availability and uptake in the absence of fertilizers applied from having a cover crop prior to the potatoes. And that's something I'm still working quite hard on because it's so complex. There's still much work to do on there, but there's definitely a relationship there.
And what would you say is the right time to I don't know, spray the cover crop before the potatoes? I mean, it's before flowering, when it got to seeds, or even before it got the flower, because I think this is the important thing to understand the accurate stage.
Yeah, so we try not to let the cover crop seed because you then have volunteer regrowth in the potato crop, which is, I mean, it's hard to control, but obviously it competes with the potato crop. So yeah, trying to control them before they seed, but generally let them go as far as they want to, but without seed. And prior to planting the potatoes, I usually try to get them. Depends how you're destroying them, but try and have at least a 4-week gap between destroying the cover crop and planting potatoes.
Oh, okay.
Unless you're on very, very light soils, which maybe you are, because generally the thing with cover crops is that they're so good at retaining water and moisture that actually they delay planting because they hold moisture in the seedbed for too long on some more medium soils. But obviously on very light soils, it's an advantage to have moisture there for longer. So I can leave the cover crops longer before terminating them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Zevi, הייתה שם שאלה? There was a question there?
No.
No. Okay, so ליאור אברהם. ליאור?
If Lior is not there, I can ask also another questions.
I think we should, okay, so this will be the last question. I think we should get towards the ending. Gadi, go ahead. And if
First,
anyone wants to still ask, it's okay, but we're going to be ending it.
I want to ask
Gadi?
Shai. Yeah.
Gadi, can I ask one little question before
Sure.
you go? And it's about the cover crops. Just right after Ziv, you spoke about moisture content and that, but after you terminate the cover crop, if you plant too soon the potatoes, do you have a problem with the nitrogen uptake because of the availability of nutrients and all the movement there?
Yeah, so you as in the cover crop
After the cover crop meets the ground, yeah,
taking away nitrogen from the potato crop, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not so much, because the C/N ratio of most of the cover crop species that we use is pretty low. So actually any nitrogen that's taken up within that cover crop is very available as soon as it's incorporated. So no, generally that's more of an issue with things like straw or compost or paper or wood chip. If they're applied, then they can reduce nitrogen availability. But cover crops generally pretty good.
Okay, so mainly it's green and legumes and
yeah, it tends to be largely green matter. Some stuff, if it was drilled nice and early and it's reached maturity, might have matured, so it's a higher C/N. But even in that instance, doesn't have a very high lignin content. And yes, we also use quite a lot of legumes in cover crops in the UK, so nitrogen levels are actually improved, if anything.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, Gadi.
So first, I have a question for Dr. Shai Sela, if you have a question. Because I see you're listening very attentively, and I know you're full of knowledge and very global experience, so maybe you can pose some interesting questions. Put you on the spot. We don't hear you. Oh, okay.
I think he doesn't have his microphone.
The mic doesn't work, Shai, unfortunately. I'll ask something in meanwhile about your teachers. If you can share with us some of your early teachers, current teachers, and who would you recommend, or who are you going to see at Brownsville? Who are you waiting to see at Brownsville?
Before you answer that, I just wanted to understand, Leo, are you raising your hand, or it's a glitch like Shai has here with the technology?
No, I would like to ask a question.
Okay. So right after Ed's
yeah,
answer.
so I'll quickly answer Gadi's question. Yeah, so my teachers were Joel Williams was a key teacher for me.
Oh wow, he's doing a tour before Brownsville farm tour. I'll send you about it.
Yeah, he's become a good friend and over the years, and he taught me a lot. Nicole Masters was another one. Read her book. I actually had a guy who's a very close friend of mine who was one of the first in the UK to offer a kind of you guys might have heard of the Haney test in the US. We have a similar soil test in the UK, which I've used extensively now for the last 10, 12 years. So it was his business who developed that soil test in the UK. So he's a guy called Ian Robertson. And then just other pioneering farmers, really. And I also have a lot of my client farmers to thank for that, because they were willing to sort of take some of my, what seemed at the time like crazy ideas and try them. And then, another very, very close friend called Ben Taylor Davies, Regen Ben, who you may see talking at Groundswell. He's usually there somewhere. Just somebody, he's really been somebody, at many points throughout the last 10 years, I've spoken to him on a daily basis, just sharing thoughts, problems, ideas. So, yeah.
You mentioned Joel, so I know he's speaking, a usual speaker at Brownsville, including these years. Yeah.
John Kemp.
Joel Williams.
Been listening to John Kemp's podcast since the early days. Graham Sate, another one.
Great. Leo, your question?
Leo, are you with us?
He lives in a very rural area of Israel.
I think
not a lot of Wi-Fi over there.
his screen's frozen. Maybe he's even dropped off now. Oh no, he's
Yeah.
still
Oh,
there.
there it is. Yes, Leo, it's your time.
Hi,
Hi.
Leo Aviram. I'm working in the Ministry of Agriculture, vegetable specialist in extension service. Regarding potatoes, do you have works reducing soil-borne pathogens using those cover crops before potatoes? Have you shown that you can reduce soil-borne pathogens in potatoes using regenerative agriculture practices?
Yeah, so I mean, specifically on cover crops is interesting. We've seen positive results from cover crops on reduction of soil pathogens and pests, but conversely, we've also seen actually increased issues of some soil-borne pests and pathogens from certain cover crop species. So this is an area which people are really focusing on now in the UK, understanding which species are good, bad, which combinations to put them in, and what to avoid to avoid some of these problems. But in general, regen ag practices have reduced pest and pathogen issues in much the same way as they do in any other crop. So we have issues with nematodes in the UK, and extending the rotation, increasing crop diversity, improving soils has reduced nematode issues for sure, and also breaks up the disease and pathogen cycle as well. And we're even now beginning to not just introduce diversity across the rotation, but actually within the potato crop. So one of the things I've done with a couple of growers here is starting to use companion plants with potatoes. So we're planting peas and beans and buckwheat in the potato ridge with the potatoes. And one of the early things that we saw with that was a reduction in, weirdly, a reduction in black scurf, which is an issue here. So I think that there is still lots to learn, particularly with the cover crops. The cover crops concerns me because some people have seen increased issues with wireworm and some nematode problems, but we're pretty sure it's related to certain species which are being used too much, basically, not just in the rotation and in the cover crop mix. So I'm quite excited to see people doing research on specific cover crop mixes and species ahead of potatoes, because I think there's a lot to learn there.
Thank you.
My principle with that has always been, the more diverse you are, the better, because if you have a 2-species mix and one of those species is a problem, then 50% of it is a problem. Whereas if you've got 8 different species, and one of them is a problem, then the risk is greatly reduced. And conversely, more species, they all have different benefits, different positives that they bring, and so it's maximizing that benefit.
Thank you. Maybe you will share with us some photos from the mixed potatoes growing.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'll send
hopefully
them,
you'll meet in one of the groundswell.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for all the questions. It was very enlightening, very interesting. I came with me and Aviram hosting this webinar. It was very interesting to learn and to hear about the differences. And I would like to really thank you very much, Ed, for your time and your patience and the ability to hear of things that are very similar but very different abroad. I would like to thank you again. I would like to thank everyone who has participated here. If anyone wants to continue asking, you can go through Gadi. Okay, so Ed, we would like to, if you could answer more questions that might rise up through Gadi. Gadi can give you his mail. Yeah. And thanks again. Hopefully everyone here will get to Groundswell this year or next year or whenever it was. It was an amazing experience. I was there as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank
See you
you.
around.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Take
Thank
care,
you.
all of you. Thank
Ilan,
you.
don't
you.
forget, Ed is not
Thank you very much.
He's not a government worker.
I-
Advice come with a fee. It's not...
That's true. That's true. He has to wake up tomorrow to the farm. Yeah.
Cheers,
Thanks
guys.
again.
See you later.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you,
See
everybody.
you soon. Bye
תודה,
bye.
אילן ואבירם.